Okay. Let's just get right into this. We have a seriously massive deep dive today.
Yeah, we really do. There is just so much ground to cover here.
And we are looking at someone who, I mean, he didn't just watch the history of Silicon Valley happen. He didn't just have a front row seat.
No, he was essentially down in the engine room, building the engine.
Exactly. Probably designing the actual tiny screws that held the whole engine together.
Engine room might actually be a bit of an understatement when you think about it.
Right.
We are talking about Tony Fadell here, and for anyone listening who loves tech or design or just understanding how the modern physical world around us was put together.
This is it. This is the source material.
This is the deep dive you have absolutely been waiting for.
So let's establish the stakes for a second. Let's just look at the resume to give you all some context.
It is a wild resume.
It really is. Like if you have an older iPod in a drawer somewhere, you know that classic white brick with the click wheel?
The one that completely changed how we interact with music forever.
Fidel is the father of that device. And if you are holding an iPhone right now while you listen to this,
Which a lot of you probably are.
right, he was the co-creator of that initial iPhone hardware, the literal physical object.
And it does not stop there. If you have a smart home setup, if there is a Nest thermostat on your wall that subtly lights up when you walk past it,
He founded that entire company.
which he then later sold to Google for, I think it was over $3 billion.
Over 3 billion, yeah. So the man clearly has a track record. He knows what he is doing.
To say the least.
But today, we aren't just doing a victory lap for him. We aren't doing a standard biography.
No, we're doing a complete carpet-style deep analysis of his book. It's called Build an Unorthodox Guide to Making Things Worth Making.
And I think that title is just perfect.
Yeah.
Because he is very clear right from the jump. This is not a memoir.
He literally says in the intro, I'm not dead yet.
Right. He didn't want to write one of those books where he just pats himself on the back for 300 pages.
He wanted to create an encyclopedia of actionable advice.
He calls it a mentor in a box. And I love the backstory of why he actually sat down to write this.
Yeah, it is a really fascinating motivation.
It wasn't for ego. It was because he realized that a lot of his own mentors, the people he used to call at midnight when his projects were literally falling apart,
The people who guided him through the fire.
exactly those people were passing away. And he looked around one day and realized, wait a minute, I am the guy people are calling now.
That transition right there, going from the mentee to the mentor, that is the core heartbeat of this entire discussion today.
He realized he simply couldn't scale his advice one-on-one anymore.
There were just too many calls, too many emails. He had to codify it, put it all down on paper.
And what I appreciate so much straight off the bat with this source material is that it is not your typical fluffy business book.
Oh, absolutely not. There are no 7 easy steps to becoming a tech billionaire in here.
You know the kind of books we mean. A lot of them are what I call success theater.
Success theater is the perfect term for it. They make the journey look like a perfectly straight line from a napkin sketch to an IPO.
They completely sanitize all the mess and the panic.
Fidel blows that entirely out of the water. He talks heavily about hard-fought wisdom. He talks about the concept of earning your common sense.
Earning your common sense. I want you to just sit with that phrase for a second.
It implies that common sense actually isn't common at all. Not until you have completely screwed up enough times to truly learn it.
Right. You literally pay for your common sense with your failures.
And that brings us to the core philosophy underpinning everything we're going to talk about.
Which is this idea that human nature does not change.
Even when the technology changes at warp speed, I mean, think about it. We went from literally no public internet to artificial intelligence in a single generation.
The tools completely transformed.
But the people wielding those tools, the people building them, they do not change.
The egos are the same.
The insecurities are the same.
The complicated team dynamics are exactly the same.
So things like how you manage someone, human psychology, how to effectively build a team, how to tell a compelling story.
Fidel argues these are essentially old school wisdoms.
Yeah.
And they absolutely cannot be disrupted.
And that is a huge statement because Silicon Valley is entirely obsessed with disruption.
Right. Disrupt everything is the motto.
But Fidel is standing there saying, no, stop. Some things are fundamental to the human condition. You cannot disrupt the way a human being needs to be motivated.
You can't disrupt empathy.
Exactly.
So we have a really massive journey mapped out for you today. We are going to cover the entire life cycle of a career in a company.
We are going to break down building yourself, then building your career,
Then building your product, building your business,
building your team.
and finally what it actually means to be CEO.
It is a full life cycle analysis from the eager young grad to the seasoned, stressed-out executive.
So let's start right at the foundation. Part 1, build yourself.
This is where it all begins. And he starts with a concept that, frankly, hits a lot of people really hard when they first step out of university.
It is this idea of adulthood and the massive lie of being, quote-unquote, done learning.
I remember that feeling so vividly. You throw the cap in the air, you get the fancy piece of paper.
And you think, great, I passed. The tests are over. I've officially arrived.
And Fidel says that specific mindset is the most dangerous thing you can possibly carry into your career.
Because in school, everything is laid out for you.
The path is totally clear. The syllabus is literally handed to you on day 1.
You study the material, you take the test, you get a grade.
And if you fail the test, you get a big red F and you know exactly where you stand. The feedback loop is perfect and safe.
But then you enter adulthood.
And there are no tests.
There are no grades.
There are only results.
And usually the only possible way to get those results is to fail pretty spectacularly first. It is incredibly messy.
Think about the paradigm shift. In school, you are paying money to learn. In a job, you are being paid to learn. But the currency completely changes.
His mantra for this phase of life is do, fail, learn.
You have to actually physically do something to fail at it so you can then extract the lesson from it.
And he doesn't just preach this from an ivory tower. He lived it in a huge way.
We absolutely have to talk about General Magic here.
Yes, General Magic, because I feel like most people know Fedel from the massive Apple successes, but they have no idea about the General Magic story.
If you are a tech history nerd, General Magic is basically the holy grail of spectacular failures.
It really is.
It is arguably the most important technology company that nobody remembers today.
Set the scene for us. Paint the picture of what this was.
Okay, so this is the early 90s. Fidel is this super young, hyper-intense kid obsessed with computers.
And he miraculously lands a job at this place, General Magic.
And you have to understand the sheer level of hype surrounding this company at the time.
It was off the charts.
They were spun out of Apple. They had assembled the smartest hardware and software people on the entire planet.
Basically the original all-star Mac team.
And their mission was to build a smartphone in 1991.
1991.
Yeah.
Let that sink in. This is before the public internet was really a functional thing.
Before most people even had basic cell phones.
And they were trying to put a fully functional personal computer in your pocket. Long before the infrastructure or the cellular networks existed to support it.
It was completely visionary. It was the iPhone 15 years before the iPhone.
They had massive funding. The tech press was treating them like gods.
People were saying they were going to entirely destroy Microsoft.
And Fidel is right in the middle of it.
He is working 120-hour weeks. He is literally sleeping under his desk on the floor. He was fundamentally convinced he was strapped to a rocket ship headed straight for the moon.
And what actually happened when they launched?
They completely crashed and burned.
It wasn't just a soft launch.
It was a disaster. They sold fewer than 5,000 units.
Fewer than 5,000. For a product that was supposed to change the world.
And the worst part is most of those 5,000 units were just sold to the friends and family of the engineers who built it.
It was a total market rejection.
Fidel talks very openly about the severe emotional toll of that failure.
Because his identity was entirely wrapped up in it.
Exactly. He talks about waking up and physically not being able to get out of bed because the weight of the failure was so heavy.
But the key takeaway here, the pivot, is that he says he learned infinitely more from that massive crushing failure than he ever did from any of his later successes.
Because that failure gave him the forensic evidence of why things go wrong.
They were building this unbelievably cool sci-fi technology.
But he completely forgot to solve a real problem for real, actual people.
They were looking down at the circuit boards, making miracles happen with the code.
But nobody was looking up at the average consumer to ask, hey, does a normal person actually want to try and send an email from a clunky device that costs $2,000 and takes 5 minutes to load?
There is this one specific story from his time at General Magic that I think perfectly captures both his insane intensity and also maybe his immaturity at that age.
Oh, you mean the slingshot incident?
Yes, the slingshot incident. This is just classic, chaotic startup folklore.
It really paints a picture of the culture.
So it is like 3 a.m. in the office. They are all working insane hours trying to blow off some steam. The engineers are totally delirious from lack of sleep.
And they have procured this massive, heavy-duty 3-person water balloon slingshot.
But because they're tech engineers, they obviously aren't just using regular water balloons.
No, they load this huge slingshot with a massive, heavy ball of basically chemical slime.
And Fidel pulls it back and fires it.
And he misses the target completely and punches a massive hole right through a third-story plate glass window.
Shatters the entire thing in the middle of the night.
And he freezes. In his head, he is thinking, well, that is it. My career is over. I am instantly fired. I just destroyed expensive company property.
But what happens instead?
Everyone just bursts out laughing. It instantly becomes a huge office joke.
Right, and Fidel looks back on this moment now with very mixed feelings.
It is a great dual lesson. On one hand, it showed they had this incredibly joyful workplace.
They were a family having fun in the trenches together.
But on the other hand, it was a massive red flag. It was a sign of a severe lack of discipline.
They were having way too much fun just being unquestioned geniuses.
And not putting nearly enough focus on the brutal reality of shipping a product that the market actually wanted.
It was this culture of intense hubris.
Yeah.
Like, we are so brilliant, we can smash windows, and it literally doesn't matter because we are changing the world.
But the world didn't want what they were making.
So the takeaway for you listening to this right now, if you are early in your career, the only real, actual failure in your 20s is inaction.
Fidel is adamant about this. You should be actively looking for environments where you can maximize your learning, not environments where you can maximize your earning.
Which flows perfectly into his advice on finding heroes. He has this whole chapter dedicated to what he calls stalking wisdom.
I love this concept. He argues forcefully that you should never pick your first few jobs based on the salary package.
You should pick the job based entirely on the people sitting in the room.
You actively want to find people who are vastly better than you and go work for them.
And he took this quite literally. He essentially stalked them.
He tells this hilarious story of calling Dee Gardetti, who was the head of HR at General Magic.
He called her every single day.
Every single day until she finally just gave him an interview to make him stop calling.
I mean, in pre-caller ID era, you could maybe pull that off.
But his underlying point is completely valid. He desperately wanted to work with Bill Atkinson and Andy Hertzfeld.
These were the legendary guys who practically invented the graphical user interface for the original Mac.
He knew that simply by existing in the same physical space as them, he would learn by pure osmosis.
He has this one line that I think every young person should write down. He says, I can't make you the smartest, but I can make you the most knowledgeable.
That is the ultimate brute force strategy.
He knew he was basically a kid. He knew he didn't have their decades of engineering elegance.
So what did he do? He read absolutely everything.
Every magazine, every technical manual, every obscure trade paper.
He aggressively compensated for his lack of practical experience with massive information gathering.
He made sure that even if he couldn't write code as beautifully as the senior architects, he knew way more about the competitive market landscape than they did.
He made himself completely indispensable through sheer knowledge.
Now, before we transition into the career phase, we have to break down this concept of looking down versus looking up.
This is a huge visual metaphor he uses. He pictures this sort of cone of vision on a timeline.
And this is essential listening for anyone who is currently frustrated because they aren't getting promoted.
Fidel explains that when you are an IC, an individual contributor, your primary job is to look down.
You are hyper-focused on your immediate daily tasks.
The fine details, the specific lines of code, the exact layout of the pixels.
Your cone of vision is intentionally very narrow and very focused on the extreme short term.
Right, your whole world is just making sure the specific thing in front of you actually works today. You are deep in the weeds.
But what happens when you need to lead?
Leaders cannot survive looking down. Leaders have to look up.
They have to physically lift their heads and scan the horizon.
They need a totally different cone of vision. They have to see what is coming in 3 months, 6 months, 5 years down the line.
They are watching the macro trends, the aggressive new competitors, the sudden regulatory shifts.
It's an absolute danger. The reason so many smart people fail is getting permanently stuck looking down.
Because if you only ever look down,
You might run incredibly fast and build something technically flawless and absolutely beautiful,
and you will run it straight into a solid brick wall.
which is the exact autopsy report of General Magic.
Yes. Fidel realized way too late that while the technology was breathtaking because they were looking down,
The actual consumer market simply was not there because nobody bothered to look up.
it is a profoundly painful transition for a lot of incredibly talented engineers and creative.
They love being in the flow state of the work. They actively despise the corporate politics and the high-level strategy.
But Fidel says if you want to build things that matter, you have to force yourself to do both.
Okay, so you have built this solid foundation. You are learning, you are failing fast, you are practicing looking up.
Now we are moving into part two. Build your career.
This is where the game gets significantly more complicated because now you have to navigate the actual workplace dynamic.
And usually the very first major traumatic hurdle for anyone is becoming a manager.
Fidel titles this section appropriately, Just Managing.
He describes that deeply terrifying feeling when you go from being an expert maker
The person who writes the best code or designs the best interfaces.
to suddenly being a completely novice manager.
It is the most classic corporate trap in existence. You get promoted purely because you are excellent at doing the specific thing.
But management is not doing the thing.
Exactly. Management is entirely about helping other people do the thing.
It is a fundamentally, completely different skill set.
It's like taking your absolute best star soccer player and suddenly demanding they become the head coach overnight.
Just because you can bend a free kick perfectly does not mean you have the psychology to teach a room full of 20 people defensive strategy. And Fidel openly admits he fell face first into the micromanagement trap.
Which almost all of us do our first time out.
You see someone on your new team doing something wrong,
And by wrong, you just mean they aren't doing it exactly the way you would personally do it.
and your immediate lizard brain instinct is to just shove them aside, grab the keyboard, and fix it yourself.
Because you think I can literally fix this in 4 minutes and it is taking them 2 days.
But if you do that,
You completely destroy their confidence and you undermine your own team.
Fidel says the mental shift has to be brutal. You have to entirely stop taking personal pride in your own individual output.
And you have to start deriving all your pride from the collective output of the team.
You literally have to force yourself to sit on your hands.
You have to watch them struggle. You have to let them fail a little bit in a safe environment so they can actually learn the lesson.
Just like he had to learn through the failure at General Magic.
He gives this incredible example of managing Matt Rogers.
So Matt started as an intern under Fidel at Apparate.
Yes, an intern. And eventually they grew so close they co-founded Nest together as equals.
Fidel talks a lot about the genuine joy of watching Matt eventually surpass him in certain key areas.
Which is the ultimate litmus test of a true leader.
When you are no longer threatened by your own team's brilliance.
But you actively celebrate it and rely on it. Fidel realized Matt had become vastly superior at handling complex operational logistics.
And instead of letting his ego fight that reality, he just completely leaned into it.
Now, this next section, I really want everyone listening to lean in here, because this is, in my opinion, the absolute intellectual core of the entire book.
Chapter 2.2, Data versus Opinion.
This is the heavy hitter. This specific conflict is where so many giant companies just completely grind to a halt and die.
Fidel breaks every single decision you will ever make down into two distinct categories.
Data-driven decisions and opinion-driven decisions.
So let's separate them completely. Data-driven decisions are the easy ones.
They are entirely logic-based. Do we have enough cash left in the quarterly budget?
Did our primary server crash more frequently than the backup server?
You just pull up the spreadsheet, you look at the raw numbers, and the answer is staring you in the face. It is objectively verifiable.
You can confidently prove it in a court of law.
But then you encounter the opinion-driven decisions.
And these are the absolute nightmares.
Is this new industrial design actually beautiful?
Will consumers actually feel an emotional connection to this feature?
Should we completely pivot our 5-year business strategy based on a hunch?
There is literally zero data for the future.
You cannot run an A/B test on a grand vision that does not physically exist yet.
You can't query a database and ask, hey, will the original iPhone be a massive global hit?
Because in 2005, the iPhone is just a crazy idea in Steve Jobs' head.
But huge multi-billion-dollar companies constantly try to use data for this, don't they?
Yes, and Fidel calls this specific disease analysis paralysis.
It is the cement shoes of data.
He tells this highly revealing story about his time working at Philips, the electronics giant.
They were trying to design a new mobile device.
And the executive culture there was entirely obsessed with focus groups.
They hired endless waves of expensive consultants. They ran relentless user tests.
They would bring average people into a room and constantly ask them, do you prefer this round shape or this square shape? Do you like this shade of blue or this shade of red?
And what were the results?
The answers would aggressively flip-flop every single week.
Because consumers generally have absolutely no idea what they actually want until you build it and put it in their hands.
But the middle management executives at Philips were completely terrified to make a call, so they just kept demanding more tests
Burning through millions of dollars and wasting months of critical market time.
because they were fundamentally trying to use a data tool to solve an opinion problem.
And here is the really deep psychological insight Fidel offers. Why do companies love data so much?
Because it is the ultimate tool for covering your ass.
Elaborate on that because it sounds a bit cynical, but it rings so true.
Think about the internal corporate incentives. If you are an executive and you make a bold decision entirely based on your gut,
You stand up and say, I believe we must build this.
and then it launches and it totally fails. Who failed? You failed.
It is entirely your fault. You were probably getting fired.
And
But
if you follow the data perfectly, if you run 50 focus groups and do exactly what the spreadsheet says, and it still fails.
you could just throw your hands up and say, hey, don't look at me. The data said it was a sure thing. The focus groups loved the red square.
It completely absolves the individual of any real personal responsibility.
So big companies inherently fear opinion, because opinion requires actual courage.
It requires you to stick your neck out on the chopping block and say, I believe this is the right path, and I will take the hit if I am wrong.
So what is the actual solution here? If you are a visionary and you don't have the data to prove your idea yet, how do you actually convince an entire company to follow your gut?
Fidel has a very specific one-word answer to this problem. Storytelling.
Storytelling.
If you do not have hard facts, you absolutely must have a bulletproof narrative.
You have to be able to paint a picture of the future that is so incredibly vivid that other people can practically see it.
You have to make them emotionally feel the future you are trying to build.
There's this brilliant quote from Ivy Ross, who is a design executive at Google, that Fidel includes in the book.
She says it is not data or our intuition. It is data A&D intuition.
That is the ultimate sweet spot.
Utilize all the available data to constantly inform and refine your gut feeling.
But you never, ever let the data hold your gut hostage.
You use the data to rigorous check your baseline assumptions, but you have to rely on your intuition to ultimately set the true north direction.
All right, we have to move on to a topic that I guarantee every single person listening can deeply relate to.
Dealing with assholes in the workplace.
It is a universal corporate hazard. We all have the war stories.
But Fidel actually classifies them. He introduces a taxonomy of assholes.
He argues that not all of them are created equal. You basically have your political assholes, and then you have your mission-driven assholes.
And understanding this distinction will literally save your career.
Let's define the political asshole first.
These are the people playing the purely Machiavellian games.
They steal credit for your late-night work.
They backstab their peers in meetings. They fundamentally care far more about their own personal promotion trajectory than they care about the actual company.
They are entirely focused on managing up, kissing up to the boss, and kicking down at everyone below them.
Fidel's advice for dealing with these people is blunt. Avoid them completely or destroy them politically if you have to. Do not engage in good faith. They are completely toxic to a healthy culture.
But then you have the other category, the mission-driven asshole.
And the ultimate prime historical example of this is obviously Steve Jobs.
Right. These individuals can be unbelievably difficult to work with on a daily basis.
They are ruthless perfectionists. They might yell in meetings. They might make completely unreasonable demands.
They are the ones calling you at 11 p.m. on a Sunday night, demanding a pixel be moved 2 millimeters to the left.
But, and this is the vital nuance here, they are doing all of this because they care so deeply and aggressively about the quality of the product.
They aren't actually trying to personally attack you or hurt your feelings.
They are intensely trying to protect the mission. They get angry because the prototype sitting on the table simply isn't good enough yet.
So how are you supposed to survive working for a Steve Jobs? Because Fidel worked directly under him for years, under intense pressure.
The survival tactic is that you have to deeply respect the underlying mission.
You have to stand your absolute ground.
But you can only stand your ground if you are armed with unassailable facts or a genuinely superior opinion.
Fidel points out that these highly intense, mission-driven people actually secretly respect pushback.
But only if that pushback is entirely in service of making the product better.
If you push back just because your ego is bruised or you are feeling defensive, they will literally eat you alive.
But if you are passionately fighting for the quality of the work, they will stop and listen. They desperately want you to care exactly as much as they do.
Which leads us incredibly naturally into the final part of the career section, a chapter simply titled, I Quit.
We carry around this massive societal stigma regarding the concept of quitting.
We deeply associate it with personal failure.
We are brainwashed with the phrase, winners never quit and quitters never win.
Fidel completely shatters that framing. He argues that strategic quitting is often the smartest move you can make.
It is a necessary pivot, not a defeat.
He provides a literal checklist for when you should walk away.
If the underlying passion for the work is completely gone, if the executive management is fundamentally toxic, if you are no longer learning anything new,
If those boxes are checked, you have to go. And he proved this in his own life.
he tells the story of joining a company called Real Networks.
This was in that weird middle period after the general magic failure, but before he landed at Apple.
He was initially very excited. He went in ready to build.
And within exactly 6 weeks, he completely quit.
6 weeks. Most normal people would force themselves to stay for at least a year just so it doesn't look terrible on a resume.
Right? You endure a year of misery just to avoid a quote-unquote gap on your LinkedIn profile.
But Fidel walked in, looked around, and immediately realized there was just deeply bad juju in the building.
The culture was entirely wrong for him.
And instead of falling victim to the sunk cost fallacy, he just pulled the ripcord.
He recognized a massive mistake early, and he aggressively corrected it.
That takes a lot of internal confidence. He ultimately decided that his own limited time on Earth was vastly more valuable than a perfectly manicured resume.
Okay, let's transition now to the absolute meat and potatoes of this deep dive.
This is what everyone is here for.
Part 3. Build your product.
This is where Fidel is just fully in his absolute element. This is the hardware god speaking from the mountaintop.
This is the definitive maker section.
He opens the section with a chapter called Make the Intangible Tangible.
And he immediately brings up the creation of the Nest thermostat.
This is honestly such a masterpiece of a case study, because when the vast majority of engineers think about building a product, they purely think about the physical object itself.
The device. The plastic shell, the glass screen, the internal spec.
But a basic what of the equation.
But Fidel argues violently that the physical product is only a tiny fraction of the actual product.
The real product is the entire holistic user journey from beginning to end.
It starts the exact second the customer sees a targeted ad on a billboard.
Then it continues through the entire retail purchasing experience. Then the actual physical unboxing of the hardware at their kitchen table.
Then the incredibly stressful installation process.
Yeah.
Then the first time they power it up.
Then how they interact with customer support 6 months later, and even how the return process works if it breaks.
It is the whole unbroken chain.
And with the Nest thermostat, Fidel was notoriously obsessed with the physical mounting screws.
The screws. This is arguably the most revealing detail in the entire book. He absolutely insisted on including a custom-designed, high-quality screwdriver right in the box.
And he demanded that the screws themselves be custom self-tapping screws so the customer wouldn't even need a power drill to install it.
Why care so much about screws?
Because he realized through intense empathy that the core consumer pain point wasn't just having an ugly beige box on the wall.
The real underlying pain was the sheer terror of installing it.
Average people are fundamentally terrified of touching wires. They think they're going to accidentally electrocute themselves or somehow burn down their house.
So Fidel realized he had to carefully design the psychological experience of feeling highly competent.
Exactly. If you open this box and there is a beautiful heavy tool waiting for you, and the screws go in flawlessly, and you do it all yourself in 10 minutes.
You suddenly feel like an absolute genius handyman.
You fall completely in love with the product before the screen even powers on.
He has a quote that summarizes this perfectly. Don't tell me what's special about the object. Tell me what's different about the customer journey.
And that precise mindset leads perfectly into his chapter on why storytelling matters so much for physical products.
We touched on storytelling briefly regarding management, but when it comes to actual product development, it is even more vital. He tells the legendary story of the original iPhone launch in 2007.
Steve Jobs didn't just walk out on that stage and read a bulleted list of technical specifications.
He didn't say, well, it has this specific ARM processor and exactly this much RAM.
No, he spun a masterful narrative. He had been carefully telling this story to the public and the press for months leading up to the keynote.
And Fidel reveals something deeply fascinating here. A piece of behind-the-scenes history.
The story Steve Jobs decided to tell actually ended up physically changing the hardware at the very last second.
This absolutely blew my mind when I read it. The original prototype for the iPhone had a plastic screen.
Right, just like literally every other smartphone or PDA on the market at the time. Plastic was the industry standard because it was cheap and durable.
But the core narrative, the story Steve had locked onto, was that this new device was going to be a precious jewel in your pocket.
It was supposed to feel high-end, pristine, and flawless.
And you simply cannot sell a premium jewel narrative if the screen is made of soft plastic that gets totally scuffed and scratched up after spending a week in your pocket next to your car keys. So the grand narrative directly contradicted the physical engineering reality.
And in almost every other company on Earth in that scenario, engineering wins the argument.
They just say, sorry, the physics are set. We can't do glass at this scale. Ship the plastic.
But because the story was so incredibly powerful and unyielding, Steve Jobs essentially forced the entire engineering and supply chain teams to attempt the impossible to catch up to the story.
Extremely late in the development game, causing absolute mass panic. Internally, they entirely switched the manufacturing process to Gorilla Glass.
The marketing narrative literally dictated the molecular engineering of the screen.
That is exceptionally rare in the corporate world. Usually the engineering team builds a black box, hands it to the marketing department, and says, here, figure out how to sell this.
But Fidel says that is entirely backward. The why must absolutely come before the what.
You must intimately know the story you were trying to tell before you ever solder the first prototype circuit board.
He also introduces this psychological marketing concept he calls the virus of doubt.
This is a powerful technique.
The core idea is that before you can successfully sell a customer the solution, you first have to aggressively sell them the problem.
You have to mentally infect them with a deep, lingering doubt about their current status quo. Make them suddenly say, wait, why do I have to spend 20 minutes programming this stupid thermostat?
Why is my heating bill always so incredibly high?
Why is this daily task so frustratingly hard?
Exactly. You have to forcibly wake them up to the daily annoyance that they have just blindly accepted as normal.
Once they consciously realize they have a painful problem, once they are fully infected with that doubt.
Then they're practically begging you for the solution. You aren't aggressively pushing a product on them anymore. You are arriving like a hero to rescue them.
Let's dive into the actual life cycle of a product, Chapter 3.3, Evolution versus Disruption versus Execution.
This is an incredibly useful mental framework for understanding exactly where your specific product sits in its broader timeline.
He breaks the entire product life cycle down into 3 distinct phases, V1, V2, and V3.
So V1 version 1 is the disruption phase.
This pure, unadulterated, opinion-driven guesswork. It is incredibly high risk.
You are leaping into the dark. That was the absolute first generation iPod.
Then you survive and you move to V2.
V2 is the evolution phase. Now you finally have some actual market data.
You objectively know what the early adopters loved and what they absolutely hated.
So you optimize. You refine. This phase gave us the iPod mini and the iPod nano. You dramatically improve the battery life. You shrink the physical footprint.
And then finally you reach V3.
V3 is the execution phase. This is no longer about wild innovation. It is entirely about ruthless business optimization.
Lowering the manufacturing costs.
Yeah.
Maximizing the profit margins. Perfecting the global supply chain.
But Fidel issues a very stark warning here. The biggest danger for a successful company is attempting to disrupt yourself way too early in the cycle.
The famous click wheel story.
Yes. Internally at Apple, there was massive pressure to eventually kill off the iconic click wheel on the iPod.
Long before the multi-touch screen technology was actually ready for prime time.
People were just bored internally. They were so eager to prove they could still innovate that they almost threw away their most defining proprietary feature.
But Fidel fought back aggressively against it.
He argued correctly that the click wheel literally was the brand identity of the iPod.
You don't just casually throw away your core physical identity just for the sake of being different this year.
You patiently wait until you have something exponentially and undeniably better to replace it with.
Which obviously eventually became the glass multi-touch screen on the iPhone.
But until that leap is fully ready, you fiercely protect the click wheel.
One last crucial concept from the product section: heartbeats and handcuffs.
It sounds totally like the title of a terrible romance novel, but it is actually a profound theory on project management.
Heartbeats are essentially the rhythm of the development project.
You fundamentally need an external heartbeat to keep the team focused. And in consumer electronics, that external heartbeat is usually Christmas.
You physically cannot move Christmas. It happens on December 25th whether your code is compiled or not.
Exactly. Or it is a massive trade show like
Mhm.
CES or the back-to-school shopping season.
These are massive, immovable external deadlines that force the entire engineering team into a state of intense focus.
If you miss that specific retail window, you are financially dead for an entire year.
That sheer existential terror aligns everyone's priorities instantly.
It ruthlessly forces you to make the incredibly hard, painful choices about which highly requested features to just cut from the V1 release.
But you also need an internal heartbeat.
Right, the internal heartbeat is your daily 15-minute engineering stand-ups. It is your strict weekly software builds.
It is the consistent pulse of the internal team. It keeps every single department moving at the exact same synchronized pace. He strongly argues that General Magic ultimately failed because it had literally zero handcuffs.
They had absolutely no hard external deadlines.
They mistakenly thought they had infinite venture capital money, and they definitely had infinite ambition. So they just continuously spun their wheels in the mud for 4 straight years, trying to make the software utterly perfect.
Handcuffs, meaning severe constraints, actually set a creative team free to actually ship the product.
You absolutely need the harsh constraint to force the final creative execution. Okay, we have the product. Now we need to actually build a company around it. Part 4, build your business.
And Friedel opens this section with probably the most famous startup metaphor in existence: painkillers versus vitamins.
I feel like I hear this analogy in literally every single venture capital pitch meeting nowadays, but Fidel really breaks down the psychology of it.
Let's define the terms. A vitamin product is fundamentally a nice to have.
It makes you feel a tiny bit better incrementally over time. Maybe it slightly improves your workflow in the long run.
But if you completely forget to take your vitamin for an entire week,
You probably won't even notice the difference physically.
you certainly aren't going to turn your car around halfway to work just because you forgot to take your daily vitamin.
But a painkiller.
A painkiller violently addresses an acute, screaming, immediate need.
If you wake up with a massive blinding migraine, you absolutely need the aspirin right now.
You physically cannot function normally without it.
And critically, you will willingly pay a massive premium to acquire it immediately.
Fidel's core thesis is that all truly great generational businesses are built entirely on painkillers.
And he adds a really fascinating layer to this. Often the worst pain is the pain that is hidden in plain sight.
Because human beings are incredibly adaptable, we just get entirely used to the low-level pain.
People got completely used to dealing with terrible, confusing thermostats.
They just subconsciously accepted the reality that they had to walk down a freezing dark hallway at night just to push a tiny plastic button to change the temperature.
Fidel's ultimate genius was successfully identifying that deeply latent, ignored pain and loudly declaring, no, this is actually unbearable and I can completely fix it for you. He talks about this concept of delayed intuition regarding the founding of Nest.
This circles perfectly back to the stalking wisdom idea from earlier.
The underlying idea for the Nest thermostat actually chased him around for nearly 10 years.
He tried his absolute best to actively ignore it. He frankly did not want to start a boring thermostat company.
I mean, he literally called it the least sexy product category in human history.
But every single time he checked into a nice hotel or every time he tried to remodel his own house, the sheer stupidity of the existing products violently annoyed him.
The idea basically stalked his brain until he completely surrendered to it.
His deep advice to aspiring founders is do not ever start a company on a random weekend whim.
Wait patiently until the idea becomes an obsession you literally cannot stop thinking about.
Research the space obsessively for 6 months. Force the idea to aggressively prove its own staying power in your mind.
And once you finally do decide to start, Chapter 4.4 delivers a very stern existential warning. You can only have one customer.
This draws heavily on Apple's dark period, the era before Steve Jobs returned to save the company.
Apple fundamentally tried to build and sell highly complex enterprise servers for giant businesses. They tried to do B2B sales.
But Apple, at its core DNA, is an emotional consumer hardware company.
Right. They were disastrously trying to serve the rigid enterprise IT manager who only cares about strict stability and rock-bottom cost.
While simultaneously trying to serve the passionate creative consumer who entirely wants beautiful design and immense processing power.
And they failed spectacularly at doing both.
Fidel is absolute on this point. You cannot possibly serve two completely opposing masters.
You get to sit in a room and painfully decide exactly who it is you actually work for.
Because if you try to compromise and make absolutely everyone happy, you will fundamentally guarantee that you make absolutely no one happy.
All right, let's scale this operation up. Part 5. Build your team.
This is truly where the rubber meets the road, because you physically cannot build world-changing hardware entirely alone in your garage.
Fidel have a highly unconventional hiring strategy. He explicitly does not just filter resumes for pure technical expertise.
He aggressively screens for raw, innate curiosity.
He highlights this incredible story about a woman named Isabel Gannett,
They hired her at Nest when she was only 22 years old.
literally a kid fresh out of her undergraduate degree.
She knew absolutely nothing about the complex thermodynamics of thermostat.
She knew literally nothing about the legacy HVAC industry.
But she possessed this relentless, burning curiosity to constantly ask why.
She fundamentally lacked the heavy mental baggage of, well, this is just how the industry has always done things.
She constantly asked the stupid questions that exposed massive flaws in the legacy designs.
And she rapidly ascended to become the lead product manager for 3 entirely different generations of the incredibly successful Nest hardware.
Fidel places immense value on intentionally building multi-generational teams.
You absolutely need the deep-scarred wisdom of the old-school veterans.
The 70-year-old RF engineers, who intimately know exactly where all the hidden technical landmines are buried, who deeply understand the unforgiving laws of physics.
But you must actively mix them in the exact same room with the raw, unproven fearlessness of youth, people exactly like Isabel. That specific volatile friction between deep experience and naive ambition is what actually creates the innovation magic. But as you successfully hire these people and the team rapidly grows, things inevitably start to break down.
He refers to this structural phenomenon as breakpoints.
It is basically an unavoidable law of physics in the startup world. The organizational structure physically shatters at very specific employee milestones.
The math is incredibly consistent. The culture breaks when you hit 15 people.
Then it violently breaks again when you hit 150 people.
And then it fractures massively again when you cross the 500 employee mark.
Why those highly specific numbers?
It fundamentally comes down to the cognitive limits of human connection.
At 15 people, you can literally all fit comfortably around a single large dinner table.
The internal communication is completely organic and invisible. You don't even need formal calendar meetings. You just shout a question across the single open room.
But at 150 people,
The brain physically breaks down. You literally cannot confidently know the first and last name of every person in the building anymore.
you definitely cannot just shout highly sensitive strategic changes across a crowded open floor plan. So what is the actual fix when you hit a breakpoint?
You must aggressively inject heavy process into the system.
Which honestly feels completely terrible at first.
It does. The early employees will loudly complain we are becoming a soulless corporation. We used to be a cool, agile startup.
But Fado strongly defends process. He says good process is not pointless bureaucracy.
Process is merely the essential load-bearing structure that allows a massive group of people to move incredibly fast without accidentally destroying each other's work.
If you arrogantly refuse to add process at the 150-person breakpoint, you don't stay cool.
No, you just get absolute internal chaos. You get 3 entirely different software teams secretly working on the exact same feature without ever talking to each other.
To help manage this complex communication, Fidel shares a very specific, highly actionable tool for marketing the team's massive output.
The messaging matrix.
I genuinely love this specific chart. It is a simple 4-quadrant grid that forces profound clarity.
On the vertical axis, you map out the pain versus the painkiller.
And across the horizontal axis, you map out the rational argument versus the emotional argument. So you have the coldly logical, why do I financially need this, versus the deeply human, why do I emotionally want this?
Let's apply it directly to the Nest launch.
For the Nest thermostat, the purely rational pain quadrant was, my monthly home energy bill is way too high.
And the corresponding rational painkiller was this specific device algorithmically saves you 20% on your heating costs.
That perfectly satisfies the logical calculating part of the consumer's brain.
But you also absolutely have to solve the emotional side of the grid.
The emotional pain quadrant was, I secretly feel like a terrible parent because my house is freezing cold every single morning and my young kids are waking up shivering.
And the brilliant emotional painkiller they delivered was this device learns your schedule and ensures you always wake up to a perfectly warm, cozy sanctuary of a home.
That bypasses the logic completely and hits the consumer right in the heart.
And Fidel's masterclass lesson here is that a truly generational product must successfully hit all 4 of those quadrants simultaneously.
If you aggressively only market the rational savings, You're just another boring, cheap utility commodity.
If you entirely rely on the emotional design, you are just an expensive, unnecessary luxury toy for rich people.
You absolutely need both elements to spark a true cultural movement. You must arm the consumer with a logical financial reason to justify the purchase, but hit them with an emotional reason to truly love it.
He also spends a significant amount of time aggressively elevating the internal role of the product manager, the PM.
He famously refers to a great PM as the absolute CEO of the product.
This is a massive critical distinction in Silicon Valley culture. A PM is not just an overly glorified meeting scheduler.
They aren't just a passive secretary taking diligent notes for the engineering leads.
They are the ultimate unyielding owner of the deeply important why. They are the voice of the customer in the room.
And to do that effectively, their absolute primary superpower must be aggressive empathy. There is a truly brilliant story about the development of the Nest Secure product that illustrates this perfectly.
Yes. Sophie Legan. She was a brilliant PM leading the Nest Secure initiative.
So the deeply technical engineering team, which was at the time overwhelmingly entirely male,
They were busy designing a highly advanced home security system. And in their collective minds, they were aggressively designing a system built purely to protect an entirely empty house.
the basic logic was I leave for work, I lock the door, and I want the system to protect all my expensive stuff from burglars while I'm gone.
That sounds completely logical on a whiteboard.
But Sophie actually went out and spent hundreds of hours talking deeply to the actual target customers, specifically mothers and single women.
And through intense empathetic listening, she uncovered a massive foundational flaw in the engineering logic.
She discovered that the female demographic predominantly wanted a security system to protect a completely full house.
They wanted a system that made them feel incredibly safe while they were inside sleeping or home alone with their children.
That is a massive fundamental shift in the core product requirements.
It is huge. It entirely changed the physical trajectory of the hardware.
Because of that one insight from a deeply empathetic PM, it entirely changed how the physical alarm actually sounded.
It shifted from a violently aggressive, terrifying siren to a highly reassuring functional tone.
It completely changed the user interface of how you actually physically arm the device at night without accidentally triggering a panic sequence.
If Nest did not have that highly empowered, empathetic PM aggressively bridging the gap between the isolated male engineers and the actual real-world users,
They absolutely would have shipped the entirely wrong product.
they would have accidentally built an aggressive digital fortress designed purely to guard inanimate objects instead of building a comforting sanctuary designed to protect human beings.
Okay, we are finally nearing the absolute summit of this incredibly massive journey. Part 6, Be CEO.
The profoundly lonely view from the top of the mountain.
Fidel breaks the incredibly complex role of the CEO down into two primary conflicting archetypes.
He labels them the babysitter CEO versus the parent CEO.
And this is just such a violently vivid and accurate metaphor for corporate leadership.
Let's deeply analyze the babysitter CEO first. A babysitter is fundamentally hired to flawlessly protect the existing asset.
Their entire mandate is just don't let the house burn down while the real parents are at dinner.
Exactly. They actively avoid taking any massive risks. They just want to keep the kids completely quiet, safely feed them some cheap pizza, and successfully put them to bed on time.
This is tragically exactly what usually happens when a massive company stops innovating and just hires a safe financial manager to run things.
The babysitter CEO is entirely focused on merely maintaining the exact status quo and barely hitting the quarterly earnings estimates to keep Wall Street mildly happy.
They are purely a maintenance worker.
But then you have the wildly different parent CEO archetype.
A parent inherently pushes the child for massive long-term growth.
A parent constantly and sometimes painfully corrects bad, toxic behavior.
A parent fiercely loves the child, which in this metaphor is the company, but they are willing to be incredibly strict because they desperately want the company to reach its absolute maximum potential. Fadel argues forcefully that if you want to build anything truly great, you absolutely have to be a parent CEO.
You have to be entirely willing to be perceived as the bad guy in the room sometimes to force the organization to actually grow up.
He tells this truly incredible anecdote about a guy named Andy Palmer, who was the CEO of Aston Martin.
This specific story is the absolute textbook definition of how a CEO successfully sets the entire cultural tone of a massive organization.
So Fidel actually flies out to personally meet Andy at the main Aston Martin manufacturing facility over in England.
And it is absolutely pouring, freezing rain outside. Just miserable, classic English weather.
And as Fidel arrives, he physically sees this guy out in the flooded parking lot, wearing heavy rubber galoshes, personally inspecting the incredibly expensive cars as they slowly roll off the final assembly line, standing completely exposed in the freezing rain. And it was literally the CEO of the entire multi-billion-dollar company.
It was Andy Palmer personally checking the microscopic details of the clear coat paint job in a torrential downpour.
Think for a second about what that incredibly visceral image actually signals to the rest of the massive company.
It loudly and undeniably signals that absolute perfection and quality is the only God we worship here.
If the insanely busy millionaire CEO personally cares enough to stand in the freezing rain to check the paint finish,
Then the minimum wage guy installing the plastic dashboard deeply understands he better care immensely about his job.
and the highly skilled woman, hand-stitching the custom leather seats, knows she better care obsessively about every single stitch. That aggressive level of meticulous care cascades violently down through every single layer of the massive org chart. Fidel summarizes this with a phrase that honestly belongs on a bronze plaque. You fundamentally cannot ever delegate caring.
It is the absolute truth of leadership. You can easily delegate the mechanical tasks, you can delegate the complex spreadsheets, but you can never successfully delegate the internal standard of obsessive care.
But obviously, being a modern CEO isn't just passionately inspecting cars in the rain. It involves brutally navigating massive corporate boards and surviving complex multi-billion-dollar acquisitions.
Fadl spends a lot of time dissecting the deeply painful Google acquisition of his company, Nest.
This is essentially a massive cautionary tale about severely clashing corporate cultures.
Because you have to remember, Fidel's entire executive DNA was fundamentally forged in the fires of Apple,
Specifically, Steve Jobs' incredibly intense top-down era of Apple.
which is an entirely autocratic, deeply secretive, and violently unified corporate vision. One single brilliant mind, aggressively controlling every single minute detail of the roadmap.
The ultimate philosophy of one massive ship with one absolute captain.
But then you look at Google's historical culture. Google was entirely built on Larry Page's highly academic vision of letting 1,000 completely different flowers randomly bloom.
It was incredibly bottom-up, heavily engineering-led, and aggressively data-driven to a fault. The explicit strategy was just aggressively fund 100 completely wildly different smart teams, let them try 100 crazy things, and randomly see what organically survives the market. And those two radically opposed leadership styles completely violently repelled each other like magnets.
Fidel fundamentally believed that marshaling the massive resources of Google meant giving a strict, unified marching order to a massive army Apple style.
But the internal Google culture firmly believed that resources just meant giving smart engineers a massive blank check and completely leaving them alone to figure it out.
Fidel would try to aggressively give direct orders to various Google software teams, and they would literally just stare at him like, "Who do you think you are? We don't take direct orders, we just need access to your budget."
It led to immense and ultimately fatal friction for Nest within the larger Google ecosystem.
It is a $3 billion lesson that the internal cultural fit is arguably vastly more important than the actual financial fit when you are executing a massive acquisition.
Which inevitably leads us to the deeply bittersweet final chapter of his journey, Chapter 6.5, Unbecoming CEO.
Knowing exactly when it is time to permanently walk away is arguably just as critical as knowing exactly when to forcefully start.
Fidel eventually made the incredibly hard choice to leave Nest and Google.
He argues that you must absolutely leave the exact second you realize you have slowly morphed into the babysitter CEO.
If you wake up and realize you have entirely stopped pushing for massive, uncomfortable growth.
If you suddenly find yourself caring significantly more about protecting your own massive ego and your legacy rather than fiercely protecting the future of the actual company.
If you have just become an immovable, crusty barnacle stuck to the side of the massive corporate ship, you have to force yourself to get out.
Don't be a barnacle. You have to aggressively plan your own complete obsolescence.
He heavily emphasizes that willingly stepping down from ultimate power is not a personal failure.
It is actually the absolute final, ultimate act of true leadership. Actively ensuring that the massive machine you built can permanently survive and thrive without your constant daily intervention.
Because if the entire company instantly collapses the exact second you walk out the front door,
Then you didn't actually build a resilient generational company at all. You merely built a highly fragile cult of personality entirely reliant on your own ego.
So we finally arrived at the outro of this truly massive deep dive.
We have literally traced the entire arc.
From a sleep-deprived young kid shooting massive chemical slime slingshots out of a window at General Magic.
To a deeply scarred, highly successful billionaire CEO willingly stepping down from the empire he aggressively built.
It is an absolutely unbelievable hell of a journey.
If we force ourselves to truly synthesize all of these hundreds of incredibly dense data points, what is the absolute unyielding core theme of all this?
For me, it absolutely crystallizes in the very final pages of the book. Fidel definitively states that everything fundamentally comes down to exactly two things.
People and products.
The actual physical products you relentlessly build define the entire trajectory of your professional career.
But the actual human people you slowly build them with define the entire quality of your actual life.
The core theme of deep mentorship finally comes entirely full circle at the end.
Fidel painfully sat down to write this incredibly dense manual purely to become the specific mentor he fundamentally lost in his own life.
He is aggressively paying the hard-fought wisdom forward to the next generation of builders.
So we want to leave you with a massive aggressive challenge as you finish listening to this.
Exactly. Where are you sitting right now on your own personal timeline?
Are you currently safely looking down, completely buried in the comfortable daily weeds? Or are you forcefully making yourself look up at the terrifying massive horizon?
Are you currently dedicating your incredibly limited lifespan to building a massive, indispensable painkiller that the world desperately needs?
Or are you safely just peddling another completely forgettable incremental vitamin?
Are you currently acting like a safe, terrified babysitter in your own exact career?
Or are you finally stepping up to be the strict parent, aggressively pushing yourself into highly uncomfortable but absolutely necessary growth?
Builders are vastly more than just a typical business book. It is a highly aggressive, unyielding operational manual for an entire career.
It is a massive, dense encyclopedia of hard-earned scars and practical brilliance, and we honestly have only barely managed to scratch the absolute surface, even in this incredibly long deep dive.
It is a fundamental call to aggressive action.
So stop waiting. Go out there right now and actually physically make something completely worth making.
I honestly could not have possibly said it any better myself. That is the absolute final word for this extremely extensive deep dive. Go out there and passionately build something that fundamentally matters. We will absolutely see you all on the next one.